Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View on this Wednesday, March 14, 2018 day. I am Nick Pitts, and I can't help but tell you Happy Pie Day. Happy Pie Day. 3/14/18. So excited to be here with you all on Point of View, and we have got quite a show for you today. We're going to be talking about everything from what happened in the special election in Pennsylvania last night, and then even continuing into this morning. We'll be talking about Michael Gerson's stinging piece in the Atlantic cover story about the evangelical temptation and kind of evangelicals' relationship with President Trump. We've got Rex Tillerson we'll be talking about, and his Rexit, one might say, that happened yesterday. And then, of course, Stephen Hawking passing away, one of the leading scientists in our day, passing away, and kind of one of the leading proponents as well of atheism in our day, and what are the implications of that. But I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable today by Kerby Anderson. Kerby, how are you?
I am doing well, and again, 3.141, and we'll go all the way through it. It never ends, so you always have to truncate it somewhere along the line. So
it never ends, nor does my appetite for pie ever end.
There we
well.
go. And a lot of people in the Dallas area probably know that if you go to Kroger's, you can get a pie for $3.14. You go to Pie 5, you can get a pizza pie for $3.14. This thing has taken off. You know, I remember a couple of years ago when they were talking about May the 4th, and May the 4th be with you, and that became Star Wars Day, but now we got Pie Day, so who would have guessed? So that's what we were dealing with today in the Metroplex.
So that forces the question, Kerby, what is your favorite pie, right?
Well, and I told my family last night that they were offering pies for cherry pie, apple pie, and peach pie, and I was suggesting to my family we'd buy one of each, and then we'd try it out, and then come to a conclusion. I was not greeted with a smile by all the dieters. I have a house full of girls, you know, and they're all going, no, I don't think so. I think we all love the peach pie. What do you like?
Oh, my goodness. You cannot go wrong with chess pie. A reminder of God's
that's a different
goodness
kind of pie.
And grace
there you
in
go.
This broken world.
Chess pie and pork for you is what you...
Oh, my goodness.
Yes.
So chess pie is just everything that's unhealthy. Put it together in a pie crust
baby.
and put it in an oven. It's absolutely delicious. And so
You've never met a pie you don't like, though, right?
Oh, that is the truth.
Okay.
That is the truth.
Will Rogers.
I'm an equal opportunity pie eater.
That's good.
Needless to say.
That is good.
Let's go ahead and jump into it today. We've got quite a show for you today, but we'll lead it off talking about what happened in Pennsylvania in the 18th district yesterday. What really happened even today. So the closely watched special election for a congressional seat in western Pennsylvania in the area of Pittsburgh was a district that President Trump carried by 20 points in 2016. Fell to the Republicans, the Democrat ended up winning. Connor Lamb ended up winning that race by less than 700, maybe over 700 votes. The absentee ballots are still kind of moving along right now. What we saw is it's still so very close now, and it's just a fascinating race, Kerby, because many are saying that this is a sign of things to come in 2018.
And I talked about that yesterday, so let's get into it, because the argument has been that this is one that Trump has won. Now, these districts move around a lot, and some of the people didn't even know they were in the 8th district because that is Tim Murphy's district. But it goes all the way back to a district that Rick Santorum used to come from. I don't know if all millennials listening know who Rick Santorum is, since he hasn't been in the news for a couple of years, although he did run for the presidency a couple of years ago. But nevertheless, this has been a solidly Republican district. It is one, as you said, that Trump won. And the way in which Connor Lamb won it was to be kind of a Trump knockoff. Now, his opponent, Rick Saccone, even called it Trump 2.0. So in some respects, you have both Republican and Democrat running more moderate or conservative than you might have imagined. Connor Lamb will, of course, if indeed this holds up, go to the House of Representatives, but he is an individual that has repudiated Nancy Pelosi, said he would not vote for her for Speaker of the House. When asked about whether he's pro-life, we talked about this the other day, he didn't really give a good answer, although he comes from a Catholic school, and when you come down to it, he probably is, but recognize that Democrats can't be pro-life. He's pro-gun. He says there's no piece of legislation he can come up with that we would have to pass to deal with this issue. That sounds more like a Republican than a Democrat.
Yeah, this is not your ordinary Democrat. This is not an FDR Democrat, to say in the very least. I mean, this is really an interesting kind of guy. And so you have Lamb, who his very first campaign ad was him with an AR-15.
There you go.
He's a
there you go.
He's a former Marine, if there's such a thing as a former Marine.
That's right.
You've got
Simplify.
He's an individual that has just demonstrated an ability to adapt to the congressional district that he wants to represent. But Kerby, I think, is a very illuminating point that many are pointing out, is the fact that he himself outraised Rick by 6 times as much, even though outside money came in. So kind of give a background. Republicans spent around $13.3 million was poured into the seat. Rather, that was the totality, $13.3 million. Around 10.7 came from Republicans, but the Republican candidate himself only raised around $600,000 compared to Connor Lamb raised by himself $3.3 million. And so what we're seeing is you cannot get outraised 5-1 and still expect to win this race.
Well, and there are a couple of reasons for that. First of all, Saccone was not a darling of the political class. Now, we're going to talk about Michael Gerson in just a minute, aren't we? Okay. And so he's part of what I call the political class. Those people that have been around Bush and those people that like the way Mitt Romney ran his campaign, wanted Jeb Bush to be the president, those kinds of things. So first of all, there was a sense in which they didn't come to him any more than they did for Roy Moore in Alabama. So that's issue number one. Issue number two, though, it's a key point. Democrats have been looking for some places where they think they could knock off a Republican. Those listeners right now in the state of Texas are well aware that Beto O'Rourke is outraising Ted Cruz. Now, does that mean that Ted Cruz is going to lose? I don't think so. I think Democrats are just pouring money into any possible race they can possibly win in the House or the Senate. And certainly there was a lot of money poured in there. And again, he's a very attractive candidate. His inability to answer questions about pro-life, given the fact that he comes from a Catholic school, where his the current generation of those at Catholic Central actually were the students and faculty that went to the March for Life, but he's still kind of kept some distance there. But it'll be interesting to see, because what we've said before is, even though he may be more pro-gun, pro-life, and everything else, now he'll just be an insignificant Democrat who will be told to agree with Steny Hoyer and a variety of others that are going to be the leaders in the Democratic Party, but nevertheless able to raise a lot of money, and I think that's a preview of coming attractions.
And what's so fascinating is you see so much money that was poured into this district that will not be the same district come 2018. Less than 6 months from now, this district will look drastically different, just because the courts have caused it to be reordered.
Here you go again.
In November 2018. So again, there will not be this district the way that it's configured in 2018. And then what we continue to see, though, is so much outside money was poured into this. Yes, Connor Lamb raised a lot of money, but Republicans poured in upwards of $10 million into this. And what do they have to show for it? Well, they have to show a loss, one, and two, this is a solidly Republican, we would argue, a solidly Republican district, to the extent that 20 points Trump won in 2016, or President Trump won. Now, compare that to the 114 other GOP districts, in which it is very similar. So is this a sign of things to come? We would love to hear from you. You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. And we're on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. We'll be sharing your comments and questions that you leave on Facebook over air. And so be sure to comment or call in. And we'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You may start seeing the phrase opinion laundering more often in news and commentaries. Journalists have used the phrase to identify something that has been taking place in the public relations industry. Politicians and journalists try to get legitimate third parties to validate their policy positions. That way they don't have to look like they're taking a position. Instead, they can use someone else to express their opinion. Kyle Smith documents the latest way that is being used in his article, Opinion Laundering in Parkland's Wake. Many journalists have been using the students affected by the Parkland shooting as a mouthpiece for the gun control message. Two of the students from the Parkland shooting have become instant celebrities on television and have huge Twitter followers. First, let me state the obvious. These students have the right to express their ideas and opinions. What they have experienced has affected them and given them a platform to speak out against gun violence. Second, they have entered into the public arena with their ideas and opinions. That means we can agree with them or disagree with them. We can point out flaws in their arguments. Such critique should be done carefully and graciously. Finally, a wise and discerning consumer of media should also recognize that media outlets like CNN and MSNBC are using these students to promote their own ideas about gun control, and they ignored other students who weren't promoting the gun control message. These media outlets were willing to promote a few of the students because they were seen as sympathetic victims, and those same media outlets warned that we should not criticize or correct anything the students say. It's a difficult balance. We should acknowledge the pain and grief these students feel, but we cannot let naive cliches and inaccurate conclusions go uncorrected. This is the challenge we face when students are exploited for opinion laundering. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Irwin Brothers Entertainment, I Can Only Imagine. Rated PG in theaters March 16th. More information at ICanOnlyImagine.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back on Point of View, and I'm Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable today by none other than Kerby Anderson. And during that first segment, we were talking about the special election that happened yesterday in Pennsylvania that kind of spilled over even into this morning. This was such a closely contested race to the extent that even though President Trump won this district by 20 points, it appears as though the Democrat, Connor Lamb, is going to go ahead and to win this district by at less than 1%. So if listeners need to be reminded that there is no such thing as a wasted vote, this is the race to point to. Every vote counts, right?
My favorite one is one last time in which you had one individual that we mentioned a while back who actually got into a runoff with a couple of extra votes, but he actually won with 23 votes.
Wow.
Kane in the House of Representatives. So listeners in the state of Texas have that one. Of course, I a couple of days ago mentioned a couple of races that ended in a tie where they had to flip a coin.
Yeah, exactly.
So anybody that just looks at me with a straight face and says, I don't think one vote makes a difference, just think about 523 votes in Florida that elected George W. Bush president, and then look at Connor Lamb, who is going to most likely be the Democratic nominee, and then eventually serve in the 18th district until the next election, because now we're going to have gerrymandering again, either officially done by the courts and the legislature or done by various partisans. But either way, that's one of those indoor sports that people still engage in.
I think that's really important for a variety of reasons, Kerby. So first, I would say that that's another reason why point of view is so important, because we're reminding individuals of just the need to be informed on the issues and hopefully have an informed opinion based upon what we would consider biblical truth, but also just trying to understand the founding and being true to what that would particularly look like. here in the modern day. But then the second point is, like you mentioned off air, is that there are a number of individuals when President Trump was just there last week that were very unaware of the fact that their district was actually going to have a vote in a special election, especially because this gerrymandering, you don't even know what district you live in because it seems to change every so often.
It's changed a lot more in Pennsylvania for a couple of reasons. I'm just old enough, since I'm the old guy around the table, to remember when the legislature in Pennsylvania, in Harrisburg, was Democratic, and then they actually flipped it and it became Republican. Well, there was no problem for people in the courts and the Democrats when the Democrats were gerrymandering those elections. There was a big problem when the Republicans started doing that. And I said on this program so many times before, in the United States Senate, the voters choose their senators. But in the House of Representatives, the representatives choose their voters because they, not so much the representatives, but their friends in the legislature of the same party so gerrymander these districts. And if there's one that has moved around, it's this 18th district in Pennsylvania. And so some people didn't know they were in the district, and others, even if they were, did not know there was an election Tuesday. So if you watched even a moment of President Donald Trump's rally, he spent some time just reminding people, you have a vote coming up here on Tuesday. And so it just illustrates again why you need to pay attention to some of these issues, because this will provide one more Democrat in the House of Representatives and could be a preview of what happens in the fall. If that trend continues, Democrats might once again control the House of Representatives, and Nancy Pelosi could indeed be the Speaker of the House, though I'm saying could be because you're seeing more and more Democratic leaders saying, maybe it's time for somebody else, Steny Hoyer, or maybe even somebody you haven't even thought of right now to be Speaker of the House, just because she doesn't seem to be doing so well in front of the camera.
You're naturally opening up the phone lines, Kerby. We'd love to hear from you and what you think about what's happened yesterday, as well as what happened even early into this morning relative to the Pennsylvania 18th special election. Is this a foreboding of things to come when it comes to November? Are we going to see a huge Democratic wave sweep into office? Or is this just kind of an outlier special election? It was a weak Republican candidate summer offering. You just had so much money, resources, and attention that was directed on this from the Democratic side. What do you think about this special election? You can call in at 800-351-1212, 800-351-1212, or you can go on to Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio, and you share your question or comment on the live video component on the Facebook page, which you will see, which is at the top of the page, and we'll be sure to share that on air. Because, Kerby, I'm fascinated about this because many Democrats are pointing to the fact that there are 114 other GOP congressional districts that are up, obviously, for re-election, just like they always are, every 2 years, that President Trump won by less than 20 points.
Right.
And so there are a significant number of individuals that are now trying to figure out, am I going to run closer to the president? Am I going to run farther away from the president? And is this kind of foreshadowing of what's to come for me in November? I mean, this is going to be very interesting, Kerby.
Yeah, some of our listeners right now in the state of Texas are going, well, I don't live in Pennsylvania, so why do I care? Well, let's bring it back to home.
Yeah.
Democrats are convinced that they could win the 32nd congressional district. That's Pete Sessions. Maybe the 6th one, because that's an open seat, and so there's more opportunity when you don't have the power of incumbencies. Let's just recognize for just a minute, it is difficult to unseat an incumbent. There used to be a time in the past, now this has changed a little bit, but it used to be a time in the past where it was more likely that a member of the Soviet Politburo would lose an election than an incumbent member of Congress. By the way, speaking of that, we do have an election next week for Putin, and I think he wants to be a dictator for life, but nevertheless, we'll get to that later. So when you look even in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, I can identify 3 or 4 congressional districts that could be up for grabs for the Democrats, which are held by Republicans. There's a possibility of a Democratic seat here or there that could be up for grabs for Republicans. And so if you say, well, they're not going to pour that much money into a congressional race. We just spent $10 million in a Texas Senate race, in Texas Senate 8. And anybody that does not remember that, they probably have some bad memories of watching Philip Huffines and Angela Paxton. They spent $10 million collectively for a Texas Senate race, not a U.S. Senate race, just a Texas Senate race. So do you not think that kind of money might be spent in a congressional race?
And think about it from this perspective, especially for our Dallas listeners right now, because they're the only ones that are really hearing this outside of the Facebook people right now before the second and the third hour of the show. Think about this. Pete Sessions' district, the 32nd district, in 2012 went 15 points for Romney, 15 or 16 points. I can't remember specifically that number. In 2016, it went 1 point for Hillary. And now what we're continuing to see, even within an individual that lost, Ed Meyer, who was on the Democratic side, that was one of the primary, but ended up not even making it to the runoff. He raised $1 million in and of himself, and still he only got around 15 or 16%.
Yeah.
And what we're going to continue to see is that, one, there's really two kind of ploys that Democrats are going to have to employ in order to be able to get elected. One, you've got to have quality candidates. Connor Lamb, without fail, is a quality candidate that reflects his
very articulate, and a great resume.
Yep.
Yes.
Great resume. And then two, are they going to have the resources and financial wherewithal? Because what we saw with Connor Lamb is he himself was able to raise the money, hence the reason why he was able to outraise Rick Saccone by upwards of 5, multiplier by 5.
Yeah.
Republicans had to use outsider groups that traditionally don't get involved in congressional districts, especially special elections, to the tune of $10 million. And so there's not going to be that much money to be able to spread out when all 400 plus seats are open, right? So it's gonna be very interesting come November 2016.
Well, and let's recognize that even though there's a lot of money poured in to try to defeat Ted Cruz, I don't think that's going to happen. But the reverse is now going to happen for the Democrats in the Senate, because you have at least 5 very significant Democratic seats. We'll put Tester from Montana, McCaskill from Missouri being the most vulnerable individuals, but I can come all the way down the list, but we're coming to a break, that are, in this case, Democrats are going to have to spend money to defend. In a sense, the Republicans had to spend money to defend a seat that they lost anyway, but they weren't sure they were going to win it, and that's one of the reasons why you also had a lot of the mainstream establishment Republicans kind of fold their hands and say, I'm not sure I'm going to play this game. We're not even going to put money in there. So it will be interesting, because that will reverse a little bit in the Senate now, because Democrats have to do a lot more defense this time, and that keeps them from spending other money on offense to try to take some of those districts.
That's such a great point, because again, everyone's got to be reelected in the House side, so obviously it's just going to be a free for all to a large degree, and there are, again, like we continue to point out, over 100, 114, 119, depending upon how you want to count it, 114, 119 districts that Trump won by less than 20%. And what we continue to see is there is a double-digit swing. May it be the Ossoff district, may it be what also happened in I believe in Colorado. So there's a number of special elections where there has been a double-digit swing.
Right.
But also on the flip side, especially on the other side of the legislature, you've got Senate, and Democrats very much are on the defense, because you've got individuals like Sherrod Brown in Ohio, you've got Claire McCaskill, Patrick Mooreside that's going to vie for that Joe Manchin seat. There's quite a bit of defense that they're going to have to play, but in the House side, there's quite a bit of offense that they're going to have to play. So we'd love to hear from you. You can call in 800-351-1212. Again, that number's 800-351-1212. Also go to Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. We'll be sharing your questions and comments over air right after this.
From Irwin Brothers Entertainment comes I Can Only Imagine. The untold true story of Mercy Me's Bart Millard and the power of redemption and forgiveness.
My dad was a monster, and I saw God transform him. I didn't think that God could do that.
I Can Only Imagine. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. In theaters March 16th. More information is available at ICanOnlyImagine.com.
When you listen to the news, do you ever feel like you're living on a different planet from those presenting the headlines? We've always known there was a subtle bias, but today, it's about as subtle as stepping off a 1,000-foot cliff. The only way to counteract that bias is with the truth. To join the Truth Team at Point of View, your support will educate and encourage potentially millions every day. Don't let lies win. Step up so that lives and our nation can be changed. Join the team at pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I am Nick Pitts, and I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Kerby, Anderson, and now we have Jonathan Bodnar that is here with us. Jonathan, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks, Nick.
Oh, very neat, very neat. So we have been talking about the special election up in Pennsylvania in that Pittsburgh area seat during the first half hour of the show. And again, it was just such a nail biter that it literally was not called till early this morning. There was it was anywhere from 600 to 700 votes, and even some absentee ballots are out. But it appears as though many are starting to call this for the Democrat Connor Lamb. And you know, Jonathan, you were bringing up during the break that this was really outside the expectation, right? This was, especially when you looked at what the pollsters were saying beforehand.
Yeah, a lot of the polls said that he would win by a 5 or 6% margin, some even 7%. And so it is a little bit of an embarrassing, like such a tight, close race. And, you know, you listened to CNN last night and they were saying, oh, it's all because Trump came in and educated the Pennsylvania voters. And, you know, kind of embarrassing.
Well, yeah, educating would be one way to put it. I don't know if Chuck Todd would say that. That he educated.
We'll get to that a little bit later, won't we? All the phrases that come out of them.
Sleepy guy.
That wasn't the problem. It was the other part, but you're not going to say that on the air, so thank you for not. But it gets back to a bigger issue, and that is when you see these polls, you've just got to recognize that there is a chronic problem. And this goes back to other races. I've used the examples out of the mayor's race and the governor's race in California and the race in Virginia and a number of others. And that is, there is sometimes a problem because you have a pollster. Sometimes they knock on your door. Most of the time they call. And they get a representative sample. And the ratio of the number of Republicans, Democrats, and independents usually is pretty accurate. And we know within confidence, I've had enough courses in statistics to know how many you would have to survey in order to be within the 95% confidence level. So all of the statistical stuff is usually accurate. But the problem, especially with a special election, number one is you just don't know how many people are going to turn out. Not as many as turn out in a primary, not certainly as many as turn out in a general election. But there's the other problem, and that is there are just a fair number of people that when you ask them who are you voting for, they may be saying in their minds Donald Trump or Rick Saccone, but they're thinking, you may not want to hear that answer, so I'll just say I'm undecided.
Yeah, I think that's one of the interesting things that, as far as my memory concerns, and it might go further back than this, but I remember it was highlighted in that 2008 presidential election. So with Barack Obama, there was many that were, again, they were just kind of, the polls were not in his favor in the leading days, but one of the internal polls continued to indicate that they were going to win. Well, what they found is they tapped into a base, the Barack Obama campaign tapped into a base that wasn't being properly accounted for in the polls. And so a higher than average number of specifically college students as well as minorities came out and voted for then what would become President Obama in such a way that we're able to tip the polls beforehand. There was a recalibration in 12, and the recalibration in 12 continued to show again that President Obama, especially with this big data, was able to keenly identify particular voters that were not outside that were outside the average, and he tapped into that in order to send it over. President Trump in 2016 as well, he tapped into voters at a greater than average level to the extent that it tipped him over. And Jonathan, as you continue to allude to, these polls are important for us to understand. Just understand the landscape, but it's not necessarily something that we can put too much weight in anymore.
No, I mean, you just have to look at 2016 to see how inaccurate they really are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just continually fascinating of what we're going to see again, because Kerby, I'm very fascinated by the big data that's coming into this now, especially as a precinct chair. You can probably speak to this. The idea that we know so much about voters or potential voters today that not only can we pinpoint and identify them, but we can configure ways in order we can specially appeal to them in order that it might be in a positive manner. It's fascinating.
Well, and Democrats were on the cutting edge of that first because a lot of those individuals that working with the so-called big data, and I've written about that. As a matter of fact, I've got commentaries on it that you can find on pointofview.net. They were very good at it, but this last couple of years, the Republicans have figured it out as well. And because you have so much data, they have found, for example, all sorts of Christian voters. They'll actually cross-match those people that subscribe to World Magazine, Christianity Today, or whatever, and they'll identify various individuals who in these particular precincts did not vote in the last election, and then they will target them to then have them come out and vote. Last time the Family Research Council in their group said that we probably turned, they said we, meaning I wasn't part of it, we turned Kentucky to Trump. Now, whether they did or not, they think they did, and now they've identified a number of states where they can target these kind of pro-life, pro-family, conservative Christians who sometimes vote, oftentimes don't vote, target them and get them out to the polls. So it's, again, just become so much more sophisticated than it ever was before.
And Jonathan, you can speak to this, especially because you're in the world of technology, right? There's certain tipping points. There's certain ways to be able to appeal to people based upon how a website looks, how an app feels, certain words that create this energy inside of people in order to cause them to act. This same technology that you've been using for years in order to get customers to be able to purchase or to be able to look is now being applied to the political arena, and in turn it's creating this a little bit of not necessarily chaos but inaccuracy when it comes to polling.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the marketing techniques that politics uses is a lot of psychology. It's all psychology mixed with, like you said, the big numbers and everything. And so when you mix the power of trigger words and social compliance and things like that, it's like you can really turn out you can turn a mass amount of people to do just about anything you want, with all those tools that you're talking about.
And especially for Texas listeners, Kerby, we've got that President Trump just put into place the leader of his campaign for 2020, his reelection campaign of Make America Great. I think is going to be the Keep America Great, I think, was the tagline, something along those lines. Yeah. But it was an individual from San Antonio. So he was the individual that was seen as the technological mastermind to this. And it just continues to show us that technology is one, going to continue to play a part in this, but just even the ability of technology to be keenly aware of who we are and how we respond is going to allow and empower some of these campaigns to really target us in very specific ways that we've never been before.
Well, again, we will be targeted, so there's a lesson for some of our listeners here at Point of View, and that is we want you to be discerners and good consumers of media. We also want you to be good discerners and consumers of political messages. And so it does seem to me that there are a couple of lessons that have already surfaced here, Nick, and the first one is one vote really does count. We, I think, found that out with what we can now call the logical election of Connor Lamb. Number two, get beyond those buzzwords, get beyond those targets. This is one of the reasons why we will have, as we always have on the website, pointofview.net, a link to various voter guides and those kinds of things. This time last week, for example, we talked with Jonathan Saenz, and he made available to people in the state of Texas an evaluation of the 150 members of the Texas House, the 31 members of the Texas Senate, also the statewide races and things like that. And then you can also go down to some of the local races and find voter guides so that you really aren't just jumping to a candidate because you like the way they look or they have a smile or you saw a lot more of their signs. You look at their voting record, or if they've never been in office, how they've answered some of those various replies and those kinds of things. We even suggested people go to iVoter Guide because that not only allows you to see whether or not an individual is conservative, moderate, or liberal, but you can actually click on it since it's hyperlinked and actually see how they answered the question. So in this world where now we have Facebook pages, every candidate has at least a Facebook page, and most candidates have a web page. You can go and actually do research before you go into the polls and vote for these individuals.
You even talked about that today in your viewpoints that you sent out, the idea of opinion laundering that's happening right now, where especially what we're seeing among the kids that were affected by Parkland, as well as others that were advocating for gun reform, rather, that are actually, while we speak right now, are marching.
Yes.
But nevertheless, it's increasingly important for us to be listening and to hear some of those commonalities. Talking points isn't anything new, but it's highly accentuated in today's age. But then, two, it's increasingly important for us to see the actions that are behind this, which is what makes Connor Lamb so interesting, is that he is not your ordinary Democrat.
No, he's not.
Like I said at the top of the show, he's not an FDR Democrat. This is an individual that his very first ad that was put out was him and his AR-15.
This is where did that come from? He and Joe Manchin are going to feel like they need to create a new caucus, if you will, for actual moderate Democrats. But you are old enough, and I am certainly old enough to remember that when you had lots of conservative Democrats, you had pro-life Democrats, you had pro-gun Democrats, but most of them are scared out of the party. Now, what happens to Joe Manchin in this next election will determine whether or not there's room in the Democratic Party for people that don't necessarily toe the line of Chuck Schumer. And Connor Lamb is going to, I think, be a test case to see whether or not you have to toe the line of Nancy Pelosi. We'll see.
And we will continue to see. So you can call in 800-351-1212. We'd love to hear from you, or facebook.com/pointofviewradio. And we'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. A recent survey of Big Ten colleges reveals that universities are increasingly providing space for religious students on campus. According to the report, these new spaces on campus serve students from a variety of faith backgrounds. Some use the rooms for prayer and others for religious gatherings. But not everyone thinks the rooms should be used for just religious purposes, however. The Ohio State University student government passed a resolution urging campus leaders to reconsider the interfaith space as religious use only. Activists off campus questioned the University of Iowa, suggesting that setting aside rooms for use by religious students unconstitutionally entangled itself with religion. That, of course, is simply the political posturing of ideologues that dislike any religion appearing in public. The efforts by these universities are to be commended. Providing space for religious students to meet is an important means of recognizing the diverse religious background of its student body. At the same time, it should be unnecessary. Religious students should be able to use campus space on the same terms as secular students. To the extent certain religious backgrounds require specific space, the efforts by these Big Ten universities are to be commended. Yet it is important to remind our co-eds that, as in all of life, religious liberty means religious students are to be welcomed and tolerated in the university setting. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back on Point of View. I am Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable on this Wednesday, March 14th, 2018 Day, National Pie Day by Kerby Anderson.
Chess pie.
Chess pie.
He loves the chess pie.
Make chess pie.
We have not asked Jonathan what his favorite pie is. By the way, it's 3.141, and because it's March 14th, you can get a pie for $3.14 like at Kroger. You can get a pizza pie for $3.14 at high five. So everybody's giving away pies, pizza pie or fruit pies.
Okay, so
or chess pie. Well, no, I don't think they have a chess pie over there.
I know. You
Maybe
gotta go back to heaven. I mean, Tennessee, to be able to find that. Okay, so you're in the hot seat now, Jonathan. We were talking about favorite pies at the top of the show, and you weren't here, so we have to ask you. On this National Pie Day, how will you fall? Where will the cookie crumble? Where will the pie crust crumble when it comes to your favorite pie?
Well, I haven't eaten a pie in probably about 4 or 5 years because
I'm sorry, you're
because I'm gluten intolerant and I can't eat, like, I'm celiac, so I can't eat like any of the pies. But they're making a lot more gluten-free pies, and so back
are
before,
they taste-free as well?
No, they're wonderful. They taste great. But I loved peach cobbler, if that counts as a pie.
Yeah, see, he's a peach guy. There we go. We had two peach and one chess.
Here's my thing about peach pie, peach cobbler, apple pie. They're a little too healthy for me.
Yeah.
I get that fruit in there, and I'm just like, this.
How about shoe fly pie? If you like a chess pie, you like that?
Oh, yeah.
Of course.
Oh, yeah.
And I was going to bring in all sorts of peeps for you today.
How about a pizookie? Is that a pie?
Pizookie. Pizookie.
Pizookie is a dessert. It's a large, sinful, beautiful dessert.
Because BJ's makes a gluten-free pizookie, and it's the best thing you'll ever taste.
Well, how about that?
Well, you learn something new every day.
Gluten-free and flavor-free.
Flavor-free.
It tastes delicious.
There it is. Okay, so let's continue to go back to this Pennsylvania 18th special election. You know, it's really fascinating, and what I'm interested to hear your opinion on, Kerby as well as Jonathan, is the idea of what to do with President Trump. Right. So I would be very interested because what we saw with Saccone is Saccone described himself as Trump 2.0. He described himself as the Trump before Trump, just to use his words, and not meaning any disrespect to President Trump, but he described himself in those terms. But what we continued to see is that there's some individuals that are running for re-election, specifically on the Senate side as well as on the House side, that are trying to distance themselves from the president. And some are arguing today that potentially by sidling up too close to the president, especially with that rally that happened last week, that this really led to his demise and downfall when it came to the election just yesterday.
And again, we've seen how that plays out. Let's go back a couple of years in which you would sometimes see Republicans point out what were the key issues for Barack Obama and how a Democrat voted 97% of the time or 95% of the time with that. I just mentioned a minute ago the 32nd Congressional District. That's Pete Sessions. I've already seen some of the Democratic ads even before the general election unfolded, reminding people that Pete Sessions has done the bidding of Donald Trump and helped push through, attempts to repeal and replace Obamacare and the tax bills and those kinds of things. Now, if Americans by, say, October and November feel like the tax reform bill was a good idea and they've got more money in their pockets, being close to Donald Trump might work for you. And all you'd have to do is say, although I agree with his policies, I don't agree with some of the things he said about some of these various media people, some of his opponents in the campaign, and a good number of his tweets. Okay, maybe that works. But you know that right now there are commercials being crafted to compare any Republican to Donald Trump and to say you have a voting record, even if you repudiate some of the character issues of Donald Trump, you have a voting record with Donald Trump, and hopefully they think that might work for them in the fall. I have my doubts because many incumbents, I think, are going to be reelected, but we'll see. It's a new day, so you never do know.
Okay, so Jonathan, what say you? What are you thinking?
Oh, man, it's complicated.
Yeah.
I think, I was listening to Laura Ingraham yesterday, and, she was talking about the importance of just keeping it local and not taking it, federal and national and everything, and how, like, these smaller local elections, if you take it, if you take, some of the larger political figures and you put them in the mix, then people are more likely to split either side. But I think that this was proof that it's like this man kind of skirted the line of Democrat in the first place, and it gave a lot of people, perhaps an excuse to, not vote for strictly Democrat, and it justified that vote, in a sense.
Yeah,
So.
it goes back, Kerby, to Tip O'Neill. Tip O'Neill, all politics is local.
All politics is local.
And
I'm amazed that you know that, because, again, that's my generation. And again, growing up first in the wards there in Boston, and also then later on recognizing that it really is local. And I think, as sad as it is to say, and we've said this on Point of View so many times, lots of times elections hinge on how the economy's doing. Mm-hmm. And if the economy is blowing and going, and again, I'm wondering if these tariffs, which we'll get to maybe later on in the program or tomorrow or something like that, have an impact negatively, that's one thing. But if people have more money in their pocketbook and more and more people are feeling pretty good about the economy, they're going to reelect their incumbent. They may not like the fact that other incumbents are being reelected, but everybody seems to like their own. Everybody thinks term limits are a good idea for everybody else's member of Congress, but not for mine, because I usually like mine. But if indeed the economy is bad, or there's been a terrorist attack, or there's been another school shooting or something like that, and the other candidate looks more favorable or in an open seat where you really can flip a coin, well, we'll see where those play themselves out.
I think, Kerby, you bring up a great point, because, again, we look at the economy right now. Just even the jobs report that came out last week, you had over 300,000 jobs that were
more than they
added,
expected,
that were contributed to the economy, that you continue to see this unemployment number go down. We think about ISIS, and ISIS is really, it's not completely eradicated, but it is far diminished in its strength right now.
But you won't hear that anywhere.
Yeah, but here's the funny thing, though. These should be indicators that would cause individuals to be able to stick to the same party. But yet, again, am I reading too much into this special election? Maybe. But I think it's very indicative of where the electorate is right now. Just very unsatisfied.
There's always some that want to throw the rascals out. So, we'll see how many, if that percentage becomes more than 10%, 15%, yes, incumbents, you better just start thinking about your next step.
Yeah.
You are going to be getting a pink slip from the voters, and it's hard right now sitting here in March to predict what's going to happen in November.
It is, because there is so much that could happen. Yeah. Because remember, what's going to happen before November? We're going to continue, we'll probably get six or seven more jobs reports. So we're going to continue to see the economy move one way or the other. Not only are we going to get 6 more job reports, we're going to have President Trump potentially have a meeting, unlike any other head of state, with the North Korean leader. We're going to see him go over to France. We're going to see a military parade. That's going to happen.
Who would have predicted that?
We're going to
one?
see the enactment of tariffs to some form or fashion. Eventually, congressional leaders are going to have to deal with DACA and the Dreamers. And so there are so many variables that are going to be at play. And should we not remember, that's 6 or 7 months from now, just yesterday, and we haven't even talked about this, yesterday the Secretary of State was fired. And so there's just so much that's happening. And so you're going to have to be able to tune in, as well as it's going to be very interesting to see what happens in November of 2018. And so we're going to be coming up to one of those breaks right now, but here are a couple of things we want to remind you of. You can call into the show, 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can jump on over to the Facebook page. It's the Millennial Roundtable, so we're going to give special attention to the Facebook page. You can go to facebook.com/pointofviewradio. Again, that's facebook.com/pointofviewradio, and you're going to see the live video feed right now that's going on here in studio. If you're looking at it right now, you're going to see me waving right at the camera and talking right to you. You have an ability to be able to leave a comment or a message on that live feed. Go ahead and do that, and we're going to share it over air as well. And so not only do we have Facebook, not only do you have you can call in, but also we've got our website at pointofview.net. And when you go to pointofview.net, you're going to be able to see 4 or 5 stories that we're going to be talking about here over the next 2 hours. Specifically, Rex Tillerson, then evangelicals' relationship with President Trump, as well as the special election. So be sure to tune in, and we'll be back right after this.
From Affirm Films, the studio that brought you Risen and War Room, comes Paul, Apostle of Christ. 2 men challenged an empire in order to live out the gospel of Jesus Christ and spread their message to the world.
Where sin abounds, grace abounds more.
Starring Jim Caviezel. Paul, Apostle of Christ. Rated PG-13. May be inappropriate for children under 13. In theaters March 23rd. More information is available at paulmovie.com.
Few of us get the chance to really make a difference, but today you have an opportunity. The question is whether you will seize it. Becoming a Truth Team partner with Point of View magnifies your impact in this generation and perhaps for many to come. When you stop what you're doing and call us or give online, you invest in hard work that has changed lives and communities for 45 years. Grab this opportunity. Call 800-347-5151 or visit pointofview.net/team. Don't let this opportunity pass by. Join the team and make a difference. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.